In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'm going to tell you why if Dejounte Murray helps the Pelicans in this one area, New Orleans could become a top 4 seed in the West next season. Let's break it down, plus a little sprinkling of trade talk in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Thursday, we're going to get into clutch situations for the New Orleans Pelicans and how Dejounte Murray can really help this team. And this is one of the areas where I think there is the biggest need for improvement and one of the areas where they can actually truly improve in a significant way. Then we're going to look at players who can prove a lot in training camp, in preseason, and maybe earn a spot in the rotation. Then let's get back to that Knicks trade for Karl-Anthony Towns, Mitchell Robinson. Are there truth to some of the rumors out there with Trey Murphy? Why didn't the Pelicans go after Karl-Anthony Towns? We'll explain it all in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. You can start, this episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, let's get into clutch situations. If you were watching on YouTube, and I might post these on the audio side too, I might put a couple of them together. The one-on-one interview I had with David Griffin exclusively there, he talked a lot about clutch situations, and this was an area that New Orleans really struggled in last year. I think this is maybe the biggest area of improvement for the Pelicans this season. Griffin talked a lot about it. The team was 14-15 in games that entered a clutch situation. And for new listeners, a clutch situation is described as the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter or overtime where the game is within 5 points either way. So 5 minutes, 5 points, or overtime, and you're in a clutch game. So basically, it's a close game late or in overtime, right? That's what that really comes down to. In clutch games, the Pelicans had the 26th rated offense. They were 11th during the regular season, and the 20th best defense. They were 7th. I went back and watched a lot of film from their clutch games in those clutch minutes, and some things truly jump out at you. And one of the biggest being they were really disorganized during that time. They just looked like they did not know what they were doing. This is on both players and coaches. It was just truly sloppy play overall. In clutch situations, they turned the ball over more often than they did in non-clutch situations by a good margin. They didn't pass the ball nearly as much. Their offense seemed very stagnant, and their assist numbers dropped with that. And it's an example of something we've talked a lot about this offseason with the Pelicans, and that was there was just a lack of a clear hierarchy late in games, lack of a clear plan. Should a player take over or not? Should they just stand around and let someone else isolation? Honestly, it was bad. And it's part of the reason why the Pelicans were 0-22 when losing after 3 quarters. They did not mount any sort of comeback in these games because they couldn't get it figured out late in games. But here's the thing of why this makes me, we're going to turn this into a positive. We're going to glass half full it, right? When you're losing, you have room to improve. Imagine if they finished with 49 wins and they were one of the better clutch teams. And there just isn't room to improve in that area. That's not great. We'd look for other things for them to try and change. This one, if you get one extra bucket late in games, a little bit more often, you go from 14-15 in clutch games to 17-12, you're a top 4 seed in the Western Conference. If you get 2 comeback victories, you're out of the play-in tournament with ease, pushing top 4. This is all in a weird way, now that we're looking back on last season and not living it in the moment, honestly kind of a good thing. So they saw a ton of room for improvement in this area, the Pelicans did. And this is a big reason why they traded for Dejounte Murray. When I asked David Griffin about evaluating, one of the things he mentioned was clutch situations. So when they were looking for ways to fix that, it led them to Dejounte Murray. And when you look at him in terms of clutch situations, this is someone who maybe not elite. I don't know if really like a clutch gene exists, but he's got some part of it at the very least. And that's a really good thing. NBA.com actually has a lot of the clutch stats here. Murray is one of 8 players who scored at least 100 clutch points in each of the last 2 seasons. He can just get a bucket when it matters. The Pelicans need something like that. Last season, he was tied for second with 8 buckets to tie or take the lead in the final minute of the fourth quarter or overtime. That's pretty good, y'all. There shouldn't be a ton of situations where you have those opportunities, but he made the most of them, he was 50% in those situations. He shot better in the clutch from 2-point range, 3-point range, and the free throw line when he was kind of in the clutch situation last year. So those numbers are ultimately a very good thing, it seems like, for this team. They need that sort of guy to get out there and really help them. But more than that, more than Murray being able to put up the points, the ability to score is good, but it's about him also being a point guard. You don't just fix all of your issues by having a dude who you can trust to score. It wasn't like he was 100% in clutch situations on shooting last year. It's going to be Murray's ability to organize the players on the court late in games. This team absolutely needs that. And with the way that he's been a leader so far for the New Orleans Pelicans, I don't think he's worn non-Pels gear yet. And the way he's kind of hanging out with the players, knowing what his job is here, with the way he's being a leader so far, you know the guys on the court are going to listen to him. So now you're starting to establish that hierarchy. Even if he's not number one on the guys you want scoring there, he's at least going to kind of organize the team, and it cuts down on some of that sloppiness, some of those turnovers, some of the bad passes. And we mentioned the defense being 20th. That, in my opinion, is really an example of bad offense leading to worse defense. They're interconnected. This is something that the everydayers of Locked On Pelicans have heard me talk about for a while. Offense and defense are linked. It's not just you play one, then you play the other like in football. They're very much linked together because it's a consistent back and forth game. This will help them score better in the clutch. This will help their defense be better in the clutch, and that leads to more wins. More wins gets you above 50, gets you likely out of the play-in tournament. That's what we want to see from this Pelicans team this coming year. We can talk about Murray just being a smart addition. We can talk about his scoring, 3-point shooting, all of those things. And look, late in games, they also need more shooters out there on the court. The court was compressed. You could very clearly see it. You need just guys to be more of a threat because you saw teams sagging off of them. Even Herb Jones wasn't getting respect from 3 in clutch situations. And the Pelicans overall did not make their open threes in clutch situations. That's more of just make or miss league and not necessarily due to sloppy offense or things like that. Like guys sometimes just miss shots, and it's unfortunate when it's in key situations. But overall, this team has so much room to improve here with Dejounte Murray on this team. And if they can get marginally better, you're not even looking for significant improvement. Can you get to 2 wins in clutch games? Can you get 2 comebacks? 4 wins right there. Maybe those are the same thing. That's all really important. It's going to just make this team better. That's one of the reasons why coming away from Media Day and looking at this team and seeing the impact that Dejounte Murray is going to have on them, I'm really optimistic about what they're going to be able to achieve this year, center or no. I'm also kind of excited because when you look at the rotation, to me, the top end of it seems pretty solid. And there's room to add a couple other players in. So let's switch gears a little bit. Look at the rotation and look at who has the opportunity to carve out some minutes, to carve out a spot in the rotation and what we're expecting. We know who the top end guys are, but what are those like kind of middle level guys, end of bench guys going to do? Let's break that down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. NFL fans, NBA fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. The Pelicans opening night line against the Chicago Bulls is out now, -6.5. Maybe you want to get on the player props. Get in on what Zion's going to do for the over-under this season. Maybe you feel Zion's got some MVP candidacy behind him. You can get in on all the NBA futures too. And now when you place a $5 bet, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. And all you have to do, visit FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast. Look, we're not just throwing out hot takes. We're not just being negative just to be negative. We got the media credential interviewing the players, executives that you want. Make sure to make Locked On Pelicans part of your daily routine. Whether you're a new listener, this is the type of coverage you're going to get all season long. If you've been with me for a while, I appreciate you making Locked On Pelicans part of your day. And now for your second listen, Locked On NBA. I'm on there once a week, breaking it down with John Krause of the Locked On Celtics podcast, a little bit big market, small market, giving you all the NBA coverage you want. Locked On NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's a great way to listen and just kind of recap everything that happened in the league the night before. If you didn't watch all the games, and you didn't, no one really has time to. We put in the work to make sure you know what's going on around the association. Locked On NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make that your second listen. So let's switch gears a little bit to training camp and guys who can prove something and stake out a spot in the rotation. There's a couple of locks to this rotation, and it actually makes this exercise pretty easy. There's Zion Williamson, going to be starting. Brandon Ingram, going to be starting. Dejounte Murray, going to be starting. Maybe CJ McCollum, going to be starting. You had Brandon Ingram kind of hint at that the other day. You also have Herb Jones, who feels like he should be starting. And after that, you have Trey Murphy, who's going to get a big extension and is a key player, a guy we'd like to see starting. Then you have Jose Alvarado, just signed an extension, really hints at his role as the backup point guard. I interviewed him one-on-one. I'm going to keep promoting all of that. And he said, I feel like I'm the backup point guard here. He knows his role. He's excited about that role. Let's also put in a center, whether they start one or not. There's one that's going to get minutes, right? And that's going to be, let's say, Daniel Tice. So Zion, B.I., CJ, Murray, Herb, Trey, Jose, and Tice, that 8 guys that I just named right there, it is. So you've 8 guys. You're really only going to run a rotation of 10 guys, maybe 11 in the regular season, but you don't really want to go that deep into the bench probably. And it'll be shortened, tighter in the postseason, but we're not there yet. So you have a lot of spots already filled. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 8 guys with Tice. So after that, I do think it's somewhat open, but I figure there's one other guy that feels like he's going to be a lock in the rotation. You still want to see him prove it in training camp because there's the ability for other players to maybe take his spot, but that is Javonte Green. I think he's going to get minutes. They raved about him at media day. When you're looking for that Najee Marshall replacement, that grit, that toughness, that defense with some shooting sprinkled in, like what I love about Najee was he was kind of chaotic in a good way. I was referred to him, if you're looking at like the D&D chart, let's get nerdy here. He was chaotic good. That is like what Najee Marshall was. Javonte Green maybe isn't as chaotic as Najee Marshall, maybe not as intense as Najee Marshall, but a guy that I think fills that role. And David Griffin kind of talked about that. Wing depth is what you want in the NBA. And Javonte Green with the defense, with some of the shooting that he can provide, even if it's a very small sample size, and it is. But if he can come here and just be healthy and find a consistent role, I think that'll be pretty good. This is someone who in 9 games, very limited sample size with injuries, with the Chicago Bulls last season, 5 starts, 12.2 points per game, 7.4 rebounds. He shot 37% from 3 on 3 attempts per game. If we push that out to 36 minutes, what do his numbers look like? They're actually really good. 17.2 points, 10.5 rebounds, and he took 4.2 threes, making 1.6. That's pretty good numbers right there. Very small sample size. Take that with a bit of a grain of salt. But this is someone who has started, who can go out and just play hard. In the main season where he played the majority of his minutes was back in 2021, 2022 with the Chicago Bulls. In 65 games, 45 of them starts, 23.4 minutes per game, 7.2 points and 4.2 rebounds. 36% for rounding up from three. You could do worse than that kind of guy coming off of the bench, especially if he's hustling, giving you rebounds for a team that's going to need that kind of presence. They could really use a Josh Hart level guy with this team. And everyone's kind of raved about him. After that, it's even more open. Guys have a chance. Jordan Hawkins was in and out of the lineup last season. You feel he could be kind of one of those last 2-3 guys to maybe get some minutes. They want him to succeed. That shooting is really important. He had a bit of an up and down season. The defense leaves a lot to be desired, but he's a better rebounder than you think. And if he can rebound, be adequate on defense, and shoot the three at a high level, he's someone that they're going to need to give minutes to. He was not the answer. I don't know if he probably should have played a little bit more than what he did, though I don't know if that was like truly going to change the course of the Pelicans season. But coming into this year, it feels like if they are kind of leaning more offensively, that's kind of what you want to see. So he has a chance to be in there. But it also means he's maybe competing with someone like Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan, who was one of the better three-point shooters on the team last season, has good size on the wing too, has some of the same defensive issues as Jordan Hawkins does, doesn't come with the same draft pedigree, having been signed on a two-way deal. But that's someone who, at times looked okay. I wouldn't say he looked great defensively. He was really bad last year. But if he's made the effort to improve on that, maybe there's a chance. I think it's more likely they waive him, cut him just to save some money than him beating out Jordan Hawkins, who has a guaranteed $5+ million deal. Whereas for Matt Ryan, it's like a prove it deal for training camp. So if they want to save some money, they don't need him out there. There's a chance for that. That's kind of the other battle you'd maybe be looking at here. But I do think Hawkins is likely safe. This is also a spot where another big has a chance to impress. This is where Karlo Matkovic could really develop and earn a spot. He's a different kind of big than Daniel Theis. He also knows what he needs to succeed. I talked to him one-on-one at Media Day, and one of the things he said was defense is going to get you on the court and your offense is going to keep you on the court. He knows what it's going to take to earn a spot, and I like that. He needs to focus on defense first because that's how Willie Green plays, guys. That was clearly made very clear to him. If he does that with the ability to maybe be a stretch big or at least a pick and roll big that they don't really have otherwise, I expect that he could have a big year if he acclimates to the NBA quickly. Basketball is basketball. He basically said you just go out and you do what you need to do. And while Summer League, he improved a little bit, but there were some struggles. He didn't think Summer League, and he was right about this, is really conducive to a big man. You need good guard play, and that's often kind of not there to set up the ball for you. Those guys are trying to score and do things themselves. Playing with a guy like Dejounte Murray is Karlo Matkovic, the perfect big to put into that lineup. I think we're hoping that he develops and that they can use him in that way. And I'm really excited to see what he can do out there on the court. You also have a chance for, maybe Willie Green wants to go in a different direction and is going to rely on an experienced veteran. That's Jeremiah Robinson Earl, potentially, who fills a lot of the same small ball role that Larry Nance Jr. did, and they liked that. Maybe he could be a starter, surprise guy on opening night. And I've long said, watch out for Trey Jemison, someone who did the scoring, did some of the work with the Memphis Grizzlies last year, starting a bunch of games at the end of the season, a lost season for the Grizzlies. Didn't rebound particularly well, in my opinion, but he's a big dude. I saw him up close at training camp. That is a big man. Maybe they just need that kind of body to be out there and add some muscle to it. For guys like Antonio Reeves and Yves Missi, I think they're going to be spending more time in Birmingham than playing out there on the court. They're a little bit raw. I think Antonio Reeves definitely has some of the scoring prowess. I was very high on him coming into the draft, so I could see him maybe doing pretty well and getting some spot minutes here and there if someone else struggles and they want to try something differently. Missi still seems very raw. I think he'll pick up the game really quickly at the NBA level, but he probably needs some seasoning first, so I don't really see them cracking the rotation, but maybe they show up to training camp They light it up. They light it up in preseason, and they play so well, like you have to give them a spot. And don't forget about Jamal Cain. He's on a two-way with the New Orleans Pelicans here. He spent some time with Miami last year, not a ton of minutes, but past couple of years, he's got some NBA action under him. He's played in 44 games, averaging 4.4 points and 2 rebounds and shooting it decently, 35% from three. You know, he's a wing, a power forward at good size. Maybe that's the type of guy that they need. So there's a couple of opportunities for guys to earn some minutes. Not many opportunities. Let's be real here, but there are some opportunities for guys to earn minutes. That's encouraging. That creates competition in training camp, and I'm excited to see what this team is going to look like in their first preseason game, which is on Monday. It's here before we know it. So, coming up next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, let's switch gears. We've been switching gears from segment to segment here. I've had a lot of y'all ask about the Knicks rumors for Trey Murphy and Mitchell Robinson. Let's shoot those down right now, but the bigger thing is, could the Pelicans have traded for Karl-Anthony Towns? Should they have traded for Karl-Anthony Towns? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Quality content here you can't get anywhere else. So please subscribe and tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about Locked On Pelicans as well. We're not just going to be hot takey to be hot takey. We're not going to scream. We're not going to talk, just give you info you don't need or things like that. We're here to kind of just get you on your way and just make being a fan a little bit better, hopefully, more interesting when it comes to all this and give you some insight. Speaking of trades, go listen to Locked On Saints. Probably weren't expecting that. Maybe you were. Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson, making sense of everything black and gold as well. Adams in a trade. Let's get an elite wide receiver in here. I think that would be an awesome idea. I am all for it. Let's have fun and just put more talent on the roster. Ross Jackson, should they do it? He's letting you know over the Locked On Saints podcast. Make that your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's wrap up the show with a little bit of trade talk, but not really involving the Pelicans in a positive way here. It's like nice that it's not involving the Pelicans. So first and foremost, Karl-Anthony Towns traded surprise deal, blockbuster trade to the New York Knicks. I kind of love it for them. I kind of love it for the Minnesota Timberwolves too. I like this all around. I'm not the biggest Karl-Anthony Towns guy. I've talked myself into him before. I've talked myself out of him too, but it makes sense on the New York Knicks, and I like that move a lot for them. So that means they have another center, Mitchell Robinson, New Orleans native from Chalmette. New Orleans needs a center. We touched on this on a show the other day, but apparently y'all weren't listening till the end, so maybe we shouldn't have put it in the end here, but still. I've got a lot of questions of what should they trade for him? What's going on there? And then there was a rumor making the rounds that said the Pelicans were open to trading Trey Murphy for Mitchell Robinson. That I'm just going to shoot down now and say absolutely not. The Pelicans view Trey Murphy as a core piece that is going to be a guy that, if they do end up trading Brandon Ingram, that's your replacement. This is someone they are very, very high on. Now, they're not going to just move him, not for a mid-level center. Look, Mitchell Robinson's fine. Is he elite? No, absolutely not. Is he a guy that you could plug in? Sure. Is he a 7-footer that's going to rebound well for you? Yeah. But he doesn't take threes. In fact, he has never taken a three-pointer in his career. Is that the type of big that you want next to Zion Williamson? Do you need a high-usage guy? Now, he's a lower-usage player, so that's good. But do you need someone that doesn't shoot threes and doesn't really fit in, that you need to work to kind of get the ball to if you want him to have a scoring impact? The rebounding's good. It's not elite numbers, though. He's only gone above a defensive rebound rate once in his career. So while he is a beast on the offensive glass, that's not what the Pelicans truly need right now. And right now, with the ankle injury that he has, he's also not playing. He's not playing till January. You think the Pelicans are going to trade their sixth man, a potential starter in Trey Murphy, for someone who won't play until January? Get out of here. Whoever, it's a Knicks fan who made up that rumor, probably just kind of looking for internet clout that's not actually going to amount to much. There's nothing to this. Maybe, yeah, the Pelicans have reached out about Mitchell Robinson, but can they really afford to put an injured player on this team right now? With their salary cap situation, he's making $14.3 million this year. For a team that's already in the luxury tax currently, can you afford to trade 2-3 players to get Mitchell Robinson? Maybe in January once he's shown that he's healthy, but you're not going to do that right now. You don't have the ability for that. That would kill the depth until January and maybe all season long. It's a nonsensical idea. That's not happening. You don't need to worry about it. Let's shoot it down now. Like, simple as that. Simple as that. Trey's going to get his extension. It'll be closer towards the start of the regular season. He's going to be here a long time. He wants to be here. They want him here. They will figure all of that stuff out. I'm not worried about the lack of an extension. These don't get done this early anyway. It's usually closer to the start of the regular season. So the bigger question to me that I find a little bit more interesting, and I think this is a more interesting discussion point, is Karl-Anthony Towns is a big that shoots threes, right? Like, that's a guy that does a pretty good job, can be an elite offensive player, has some issues, don't get me wrong, but that's someone who's pretty good. Should they have traded for him? And the answer to that question is actually kind of similar to Mitchell Robinson. Mitchell Robinson, when we talked about it, when I did the episode where we really dove into it, like, you can't figure out a trade between just the Pelicans and Knicks that works. You can't. It's just mechanically untenable, impossible for New Orleans right now. Truthfully, similar thing with Karl-Anthony Towns. He's making $49 million this year. Even if you were trading Brandon Ingram and like someone else, who would it be? You've got to equal that number. And because the Pelicans are lacking mid-tier salary, it creates some impossibilities for them when it comes to trades. That contract at $49 million, $53 million, $57 million, $61 million as a player option in 2027, 2028, just that wasn't going to work here. I can't really figure out a trade where long-term that works without trading, unless you were trading Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum for him in the same deal, which maybe, but that's still not great for New Orleans. And maybe they could have gotten this deal done, but do the Minnesota Timberwolves value Julius Randle over Brandon Ingram? I'm a big Randle guy, actually. Love that guy as a player. So maybe they did too. That factors into it as well. Maybe you couldn't get that deal done. Dante DiVincenzo is a great role player. What's the deal that New Orleans would have put together to beat them if they don't want picks? And I don't think they were really looking for tons and tons of picks in a Karl-Anthony Towns trade. So it's always interesting to see like good players get traded to other teams. Like, my team could have gotten that guy. In this case, I don't think so. I don't even think they necessarily had conversations about it when it came down to that as well. There was a trade the Lakers made with the Utah Jazz and the Timberwolves a couple of years ago, like Rui Hachimura and some of those deals, where it's like, could New Orleans have jumped in and done that and kind of hijacked it? Yeah, probably. And maybe they did, but there was something else in, people are like, why didn't New Orleans do that? They can beat the offer. And it's like, no, actually they had reached out. They made an offer to the Jazz in that trade, but the issue was moving their point guard, Mike Conley's deal, out of there. And that was a bigger, more important thing for him. And that's kind of why they ended up with a different trade. Doesn't mean that your team didn't try and reach out. Doesn't mean the Pelicans didn't reach out to the Timberwolves here. But I actually don't know if they really did, because it's hard to figure out a deal for Towns coming to New Orleans, even if he would have fit really well, just the financial realities of the situation. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please subscribe. Rate the show 5 stars too if you get a chance, wherever you get your podcasts. Tell a friend. Leave a comment down below on YouTube as well. If you're an everydayer, let me know. Appreciate y'all. It's been a fun week. We got another show tomorrow. There's going to be more content coming. I got a bonus little interview with Shamit Dua of In the Know that I'm going to post at some point. Going to be a lot of fun. So please subscribe. Watch the show, all of those things. We've got some more Media Day takeaways, training camp. We're going to gear up for a preseason game on Monday. I can't wait. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.